we're going to go through a pile of stuff tonight, so don't worry about trying to remember it all. You're not going to be able to do that. You don't have to. A lot of the stuff I'll talk about is available on the website in more detail that you can go over at your leisure. So it's more important just to come with me as we talk about the why of things. We'll take you through that, because the more you understand about that, the easier it is to sort of navigate the whole system. So happy to, it probably might be best to save questions till the end, because sometimes people ask a question that I'm just about to cover. But I'm happy to answer questions at the conclusion of my spiel, and then happy to hang around for a while afterwards if you want to have a chat with me individually. This is sort of a modified, very similar presentation to what I'd give if I was just talking to a group of Year 12s at school. So you will know the same information there. And I like to start off with some good news for them. And the good news is that there are so many more pathways available to them that there probably were. If you went through the uni system, anything like that, you might remember, what was it, TEE days and TAE before that. And back in the day, you sort of had one shot to get into university straight from Year 12. And if you didn't manage it then it was sort of, see you later, think of something else. It's not like that anymore, which is good for the students. It should take a lot of the pressure off things. They still manage to work themselves up into a bit of a frenzy every now and again, but I try to get across there are so many pathways. You can always get somewhere where you want to go. Sometimes it's a matter of getting a bit of info and advice if you need it. But these are some of the most common pathways that people use. I will talk about early offers a bit later, just so if you understand the fundamentals, then early offers sort of make a bit more sense. So ATAR is still the most common pathway that Year 12s qualify for entry to university. And it is the program that's actually been specifically designed for that. So those of you who have students on an ATAR pathway, they're getting good preparation for university study next year. I'll go here. Quite a few students these days are actually qualified by completing vocational studies. That's becoming increasingly common. So a certificate 4 or higher, either at school, a lot of kids will complete that during Year 12 or even earlier sometimes, or they'll go off and do some more TAFE study after Year 12, and then if they want to move on to university, they can use their TAFE qualifications to do that. We'll come back to that shortly. Some courses let you put in other information apart from just purely academic information. So quite a few courses now have what we call portfolio entry or experience-based entry. And this is where the university will let you submit that other information, usually directly to them. And it might be something like school reports, extracurricular activities. The most common one that everyone sort of seems to understand, if you're going to go into a music course at university, you've got to do a practical audition. So sometimes it's a very practical demonstration of your skills in a certain area. Other times it's just sort of broader information about what your strengths are that they'll use to assess you. Sometimes they do that alongside the ATAR. If you're doing ATAR, they look at both kind of things. So this is a good sort of backup plan for ATAR students. Sometimes they'll use that information instead of considering the ATAR. So it can vary from course to course and from uni to uni. The other fairly recent development is these enabling programs. These are like stepping stones between school and uni. They were originally designed, and they're still used very much for people who might not be on the ATAR pathway. So people who are doing general courses or sometimes doing Cert 4, they want to use this to give them a bit more confidence going into university. They're usually about 6-month programs that the universities teach. Sometimes they even deliver them within schools, etc., but it's very common to do it after school for your first semester. Good for ATAR students just in case, as a backup plan, just in case the ATAR sort of crashes and burns, which sometimes happens through nobody's fault. You'll still be able to get into the enabling program. If you do okay in that, and a good percentage of people do, it's not a difficult course, that will then enable you to move on to degree programs after that. So whatever pathway you're on, there's always a way forward. Okay, so it's really important to grasp that, so that at the end of the year, whether you get good news with the results or not so good news, there's never really a door slammed in your face anymore. There's always a way forward. No matter what pathway people are on though, there are certain boxes that you need to tick in order to get into degree courses at university, usually. The early offers has thrown some of this out, but these are the basic sort of building blocks really for success at university. That's why they have them in place. So they generally do like you to achieve WACE. Now that means you don't have to be a remarkable student to do that. You've just got to be a good, solid, consistent performer. And I think that's why the universities have that in place, because when you think about it, university degrees go for 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 years, and the secret to success in that is actually doing the work and passing what you need to every 6 months, every semester. You can't just sort of slack off for 2.5 years and hope that a blistering effort in your last semester is going to do it. Okay, so, and WACE demonstrates, achievement of WACE demonstrates that same kind of stickability and consistent kind of effort. It's usually not a huge problem for most people in the state. Give people a little bit more of a challenge is the university English requirements. Now, no matter what course anyone's going into at uni, it's going to stretch your English capabilities. When you think about it, listening to lectures and taking the notes that you need to take from that, a heap of reading. Those of you who have been there will probably remember this. I remember when I was going through uni early on, I learnt very quickly. Lecturer said, before next week's lecture, I need you to read chapter 2 of this textbook. And I thought, yep, how hard can that be? I can leave that till the night before. And then I open the textbook and find that chapter 2 actually goes for about 90 odd pages of very close typed text, no pictures to break the monotony or anything like that. So I very quickly learnt that read chapter 2 doesn't just mean pick it up the night before. And when you do that, you've also got to sort of take notes from that as well. You've got to sort of pick out the important bits that you're going to be able to reuse later on in your studies. So that's why the universities have English requirements that they'd like you to meet in Year 12. Now for ATAR students, that's usually a scale score of 50 or more in one of the English ATAR subjects. Murdoch is a little bit more flexible these days, and basically if you finish Year 12, they'll tick that box for you. The other 3 universities do want that performance in an English subject. If you try one of those subjects and you don't happen to get that magic number that you're looking for, don't despair. We'll look at a couple of concessions that we can look at. So perhaps you might have done better in the schoolwork than in the actual exam. Perhaps exams aren't really your thing, which happens for a lot of people. So they'll look at your exam results and school performance separately to see whether one of those was stronger or not, and if so, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt. If all else fails, we at TISC will invite students to sit a second chance English test after they get their results. The good news is 9 out of 10 people pass that test. It's not a hard test to pass, so it's nothing that you have to study for or anything like that. The only real downside of it is that it occurs right in the beginning of January, right in the middle of holidays, when people are right out of study mode. If you're down south somewhere, you've got to come back to Perth to sit the test. There's only sort of 2 sessions that happen on a Wednesday and a Saturday, I think. So it's more a pain in the neck rather than anything having to sit it. And I normally help out sort of herding people on that date, help out the specialists to do it. So you see lots of sad and miserable people coming into that test, and they're thinking, if only I'd studied a little bit harder in my English studies this year. So I know English or literature or EALD isn't everybody's favourite subject. So I just say to students, it might not be your best subject, might not be your favourite subject, but just keep at it. It'll just save you a bit of hassle at the end of the year if you fall over this line. Prerequisites, you probably would have thought a bit more about this back in Year 10 when you're choosing sort of senior secondary subjects. So this is just sort of background courses that they want you to have a handle on to go into certain courses at university. There aren't that many of them these days. They've sort of generally phased them out. Largely because universities now offer a lot of bridging courses at university that you can pick up if you need to. So quite often I'll talk to students and they're a bit concerned because in Year 12 they discover a course that they'd really love to do. It really excites them, but they realise, hang on, it's saying that I need to have chemistry and I haven't done chemistry. So if that's the case, I always say just give the universities a call, explain the situation. They can tell you what bridging courses you can take and help plan the enrolment so that you don't miss out. Again, never a shut door, always a possibility, but that kind of information might not be totally apparent to people when they're trying to do it. It's very hard to find that info on their website. It's not in their glossy brochures. So you've really got to call them and have a chat with them, and they'll be very happy to help you out with that. The final thing is some kind of academic runs on the board, which makes sense. They want to know that you've actually got the goods to cope with their courses once you get there. And this, for the long-suffering students doing ATAR, is where the ATAR comes in. So if your student isn't doing ATAR at the moment, bear with us for a couple of minutes. I just want to take people through a bit about the ATAR, what it means, how it works and all that kind of stuff, which hopefully will reduce a bit of stress as well. So let's start by thinking about it this way. Those of you who are parents who did this kind of stuff a long time ago might need to cast your mind back. Students will be very much aware that of the amount of assessment that gets done, the hundreds of tests, perhaps thousands of pieces of work they've handed in over the years. And I say to students, if you did a test next week and got, say, 75 for that test, I wonder how you'd feel about that. And if I'm talking to a big group of students, I look around the room and some kids would be absolutely amazed to get 75. You can see they'd be delighted to get 75, and there's a handful that would be absolutely devastated to get 75 as well. And it might depend which subject we're talking about too. It can also depend a little bit on how well people do around us. So we normally think, okay, if someone says a mark of 75, our natural kind of frame of reference is a range of marks from 0 to 100. So 75 is a good kind of mark to get in that context. But how do you feel, or how would you feel, if in that particular piece of work, when you got the marks back, you found out that the lowest score anyone got was 20, but the highest anyone got was 80. If you got 75 in that context, you might feel a bit better about it because you're closer to the top of the class. And just because I like to rub in and sort of state the obvious, if in fact the lowest score anyone got in that particular assignment was 70 and you got 75, then the 75 doesn't feel quite so great after all, does it? You're close to the bottom of the class. So it's a bit weird, isn't it? The raw number stays exactly the same in all of those contexts, but how we feel about that number changes really depending on how well everyone else does around us. And that's really, I mention that because that's really what TISC is there to do. One of our major tasks is to look at everyone's individual performance, the 75 or the 42 or whatever they get in each of their subjects. But what the universities want us to do is to describe how that positions someone in relation to everyone else. It's sort of working out what that is in context. And that's what we use the ATAR for. So you'd know ATAR stands for Australian Tertiary Admission Rank. You'd probably also know there's a number between 0 and 99.95 being the highest. If you get below 30 as an ATAR, we don't tell you exactly what you got. We just say you got less than 30 because it's not going to do you much good no matter what it was underneath that. And it goes in bands. So 99.95 is the top band, 99.9 is the next highest band. So I do say to students, if you're going to sort of forge your ATAR certificate at the end, just make sure the last digit is a 0 or a 5, or we'll immediately know that you've done the dirty. You can't get an ATAR of 99.97, okay? Not that I'm encouraging your students to sort of fiddle their results or anything like that. And all the ATAR is really is a way for us to compare literally thousands of people's performance all at once for entry to university. And as I've already said, it isn't the only thing that gets used these days either. There might be an audition or another kind of aptitude test or something like that that's used as well as or even instead of the ATAR. Over the years, as I've been talking to students, I think the most common misconception I come across is people think that the ATAR is actually their percentage. So they think, okay, to get an ATAR of 75, that means I have to get 75% in all of my subjects, or an average of 75 or something like that. It isn't. It's actually a description of your performance compared to everybody else. It doesn't actually tell us what your actual percentage is. So an ATAR of 75 doesn't mean that you get 75% in everything. It means that whatever you do get this year is equal to or better than what 75% of everyone of the similar age in WA achieves this year. So when I'm talking to students early on in the year, I sometimes say to them, so there are two ways you can go with this. You can either continue to work solidly and do your best and get the best performance that you can, or pray really fervently that everyone else in the States has an absolutely disastrous rest of the year, but you don't, so that your mark stays constant and theirs all decline. And I've stopped saying that quite so much because in a couple of classes when I've said that to students, towards the back usually I'll catch someone's eye and I can see a light bulb go on and someone thinks, I think I've just worked out what I'm going to do for the rest of the year. So we try not to encourage that. Working hard is your best bet. And that's why ATARs are actually valid across the country. So every state's ATAR, even though they are calculated on different subjects and they have some different rules about what can count, in the end it's always a description of one person's performance in the context of everyone else in that state, in that year. Okay, so that's why you can take your WA ATAR and use it anywhere else, and someone can get their ATAR in Tassie or Queensland and use it over here. So how do we calculate it then? It would be easier if it was just your percentage. So how do we get to the ATAR? At the end of the year, about the second week of December, spare a thought for me because that's when everything gets very busy for us. For all of the students that have at least 4 ATAR subjects, we'll calculate a number that's called their tertiary entrance aggregate. And that's just their best 4 scaled scores from their ATAR subjects added together. If they've done language other than English, and if they've done methods and or specialist maths, they get 10% of those scaled scores added onto their aggregate as a bonus. Okay, so at the end of the year, if a student had 4 ATAR subjects and their scaled scores were all 100 from those subjects, and if they did a language other than English and they got 100 for that, and if they did methods and specialists and they got 100 for both of those, they'd be slightly frightening, I can assure you, but they'd actually end up with an aggregate of 430 because that's the highest that you can get. Over the last couple of years, the highest anyone has achieved, 2 people have achieved this over the last 6 years I've been in the job, highest has been 428. So there are some seriously scary students out there. Now, Year 12, so I'll just give you a moment to wallow in despair. When I'm talking to a big group, I have to actually stop because everything sort of falls apart for a couple of minutes there and people are thinking, oh gee, I'm never going to get there. Don't worry too much about that. That's sort of freak show kind of achievement, okay? That's 2 people in 6 years. Don't let it worry you. So here's how it would work. Someone in this example has 5 subjects. So remember I said we use your best 4. So we wouldn't actually use the methods score because that's their lowest one. We'd add up the other 4. But because they've done Italian, a language other than English, and because they've done methods, they get the bonuses for those subjects added in. So even if your student is doing those subjects, but they don't end up in their best 4, you still get the benefit of the bonuses for having had a go at them. So this person would end up with 241.8. So we work that all out to find the best possible aggregate we can for every student. And then the next step that we do is put all of the aggregates in order. So last year, the highest aggregate that anyone got in WA was 419. So that person goes on top of the pile, basically, and the rest of us mere mortals follow along behind them in rapidly descending order until all about 12,500 people's aggregates are in order from highest to lowest. The final stage that we do is to apply a formula that tells us how many of those aggregates get slotted into each of the ATAR bands. And we basically start at the top of the list and work our way down. So last year it told us that the top 14 people in WA, the top 14 aggregates would be assigned 99.95. The next 16 were given 99.9 and so on and so on and so on, right down this humongous list until they'd all been assigned. We then see where the thresholds change, where we move from one ATAR to another, and then we publish lots of report that summarises all of this. The other common misconception I come across is that people think that we work all of this stuff out in advance. They think that TISC has a meeting with the School Curriculum Standards Authority and works out sort of in September or October what score you're going to need for a particular ATAR. It might surprise you to know that we don't do any of it in advance. We start it completely from scratch every year and we don't know how it's going to pan out. It normally pans out roughly the same because we're talking about big numbers of students, so that sort of keeps things fairly stable. But these minimum aggregates for particular ATARs do change from year to year because remember the principle is we're comparing people's performance in the context of everyone else this year. Okay, we're actually not comparing you to last year's people or next year's people, it's all about how you perform in this year's cohort. So that's why I can't tell you what it's going to be this year, much as we'd probably make $1 million if we could. But this is what I can tell you what happened last year, how it panned out. So if it was last year, the person with 241.8 would have gotten an ATAR of 79.8. And if they had different subjects that didn't get the bonuses, their aggregate would have been a bit lower, so their ATAR would have been a bit lower as well. Now remember I said you don't have to get 75% to get an ATAR of 75. This is where things get a bit more encouraging. So last year, if someone's average scale score across their best 4 ATAR subjects was 60, their ATAR would have been 79.1. And if their average across their best 4 subjects was 70, their ATAR jumps up to 90.85. So there's always a bit of a jump from your average performance to the ATAR that you achieve. And the area I want to highlight, at the end of the year everyone gets very excited about the kids right up here and names in the paper and all that kind of stuff, media coverage and everything. But in fact most people around here, and this is how you get into university. You don't actually have to be an academic freak to get into university. This is good, solid, absolutely average kind of performance. If we work out about 65,000 separate scaled scores by the time we finish, and if we average every one of those 65,000 scores, it comes out at exactly 60. So 60 is the average mark. Okay, so you don't, Year 12s, I say, whatever you do, don't spend any time or effort this year berating yourself because you're not going to be top of the school or you're not the best in every subject or anything like that. You actually don't have to be. Okay, last year, or in fact, a year before last, it would be higher even last year because of the early offers, but even up to that point, over 93% of Year 12s got into university. They might not necessarily have gotten into their dream course, but they got into university. So the odds are really stacked in people's favour these days. What I would say, I find this next thing quite interesting. Let me go back. It's really sort of a message to the people here. What I find is that the kids up here sort of motivate themselves because they're getting lots of, they're getting good marks, they're getting well dones from the teacher, everyone's sort of patting them on the back. The kids who struggle for motivation a little bit sometimes are these students. They're good students, they're sort of good average students, but they're thinking, oh, well, I'm not getting 95, whatever, so what's the use kind of thing. I find this next thing a bit motivating. May or may not agree, but it amazes me how a very slight improvement in someone's performance throughout Year 12 really pays off in terms of their ATAR at the end of the year. So it depends really where you are in the scheme of things. If you're already at the top, say at the beginning of Year 12, so you're one of these brain box kids who's getting really good marks, etc. If you manage to improve your average by 5 points by the end of the year, you will get a slightly better ATAR, but it's really hard to move from one ATAR to the top because the competition is so intense. There are big gaps between people right up there. If you're starting, say, on an average mark of around about 80 and you improved it to 85, you get a bit more of a boost. And as we go down, that 5-point improvement makes a bigger and bigger difference. So if at the end of the year, or the beginning of Year 12, if you're sitting on sort of a 50, which is slightly below sort of the scale score average at the end, and you manage to improve that to 55, look at the jump in your ATAR there. So it's in this sort of area that that reasonably small increase actually pays off big time to people. So I know that's why schools keep on people's backs, say keep working, don't give up, because they know what an impact that can have. The other thing, I'm assuming that a lot of schools in the outer metro area qualify for bonus points from the universities. We do it automatically anyway, so you don't have to worry about it. But what happens is a lot of schools that are sort of not sort of in the centre of the metro area, more outlying. Some schools that don't have a lot of students heading to university, those kind of things. Rural, remote schools as well qualify for this. Sometimes students' permanent postcode can qualify them for these kind of things, and sometimes financial disadvantage can also do them. These are additional points that universities add to someone's ATAR that can actually be a really nice little bonus at the end of the year. So say someone gets their basic ATAR something like this. And the school or them as an individual is eligible for this adjustment factor. The government doesn't let us call them bonus points anymore for some reason. They're a bit funny about that. So we have to call them adjustment factors, or bonus points. What happens is you get a new number calculated called your selection rank, which is your ATAR plus any additional bonuses. And that's the number that that particular university uses to choose you for their courses. Now this can be a significant boost. Murdoch add up to 10 points to people's ATARs, the others normally do 5. It can sometimes have a cap on the highest one that you can get. I think Murdoch and ECU cap it at 90, being the highest selection rank. Curtin will take you right up to 99.9, I think, and UWA cap it at 98, being the highest. So we work all of that out automatically for you and apply them automatically. When you get your results, you'll see your ATAR up the top of the information, and down the bottom you'll have the various ranks for the different universities. So it can be a really nice little boost to get you into courses that you might not have thought about before. Just a quick word about what we do to people's marks, mainly because it causes a bit of angst around the place. So just want to explain what we do and why we do it. So remember, our job is comparison. And we have to compare people that come to us from a couple of hundred different schools across WA. It's hard enough comparing, say, 30 students in one class when you throw that out to sort of several hundred schools. And last year I counted there were 82 different subjects that could be used towards the ATAR. So how do you compare those wide variety of schools and subjects? And then within those different contexts, you've got kids getting all sorts of different marks as well. Somehow we have to find a way that's as fair as possible to make that comparison. So this is why we actually do adjust people's marks from the school mark to the final one that's called the scaled mark. Okay? And there's good reason for it. 3 processes that happen: moderation, standardisation and scaling. Sometimes scaling gets used as an umbrella kind of term and gets blamed for a lot of stuff, but it could also, there are 2 other adjustments that can happen. The first thing is called moderation. This just double checks that schools have marked people appropriately, that their marking standards are okay. If you think about it, and when I'm talking to Year 12s, I say, well, Year 12s would know that some teachers are tougher markers than others, right? As you go through, you think, oh gee, Mr So-and-so or Miss So-and-so, she's really tough. To get an A from her is like a miracle kind of thing. So it happens. Say you had a group of students here doing a subject, and the teacher for that subject was one of those quite tough markers throughout the year. And down the road there was another school with a group of students doing exactly the same subject, but they had a much more generous marking teacher. So they're getting higher marks than your kids, not because they're better at the subject, but because they're being marked at a slightly different standard. So if we let that lie, then that would be unfair to your students because they would miss out and the others would get an advantage just because they had an easier marking teacher. So the School Curriculum and Standards Authority just does this. It checks how students as a group do in the exam compared to how they've been marked at school. And normally it's very close correlation because teachers spend a lot of time double checking their marking standards. But it just prevents anyone getting advantage because we've got an easy marking teacher, because everyone in the state sits exactly the same exam for a particular subject. So it's used as a sort of objective kind of benchmark to double check. Then the moderated or adjusted school marks get put together with the exam marks to form the combined mark. It's sometimes good for Year 12 students to realise that if they've done good solid work throughout the year, they've got half their final mark locked away before they even sit the exam. So sometimes everyone gets stressed, oh, the exam is going to make me or break me. If you've done good solid work, you're well prepared for the exam, and it's 50% of your final mark from your school mark. But there's a process that just takes account of what happens if you get, say, an easier exam paper at the end of the year or a tougher exam paper at the end of the year. Again, talking to Year 12s, you know that sometimes a test in one subject, one test might be great and everyone thinks that was okay, felt I could do okay in that, and then another time the test is a real stinker and even the best person in that subject struggles in it. Now the WASE exams go through lots of checks and they are designed to produce a certain average mark and a certain range of marks. Most of them get within sort of 1 mark of that, which is quite remarkable. But occasionally you'll get an exam paper that's a bit easier than normal, so everyone does better than they're expecting, and the average that comes out of that is high. And another subject might be a bit tougher than normal, and so the average mark that comes out is a bit lower than expected. So the standardisation process just evens things up to make sure that if you happen to strike a tough exam paper at the end of the year, you won't be disadvantaged, provided it's tough for everyone. If it's tough for everyone, we'll see that and we'll adjust for it. Then the final thing is this scaling process. Now I love scaling because scaling is a process that normally causes parents to ring me up and tell me off at the end of the year. If you've had previous students go through, I might have already spoken to you, you never know. If not, I look forward to having a chat with you at the end of the year. And normally they're ringing up because their kids' marks have gone down as a result of scaling. I've yet to actually have a call from a parent that rings up to complain because their kids' marks have gone up as a result of scaling, even though they do go up as well as down. Just that obviously if they go up, we've realised your student's innate brilliance and have just rewarded that. And if it goes down, there's been some horrible mistake and we don't know what we're doing and we're all corrupt. So I've had all of those discussions. So look, I'll be sympathetic. I've said to lots of parents, look, I'd be cheesed off if it was my kid too. I get where you're coming from. I said, I'm sympathetic, not a single thing I can do about it because it's an entirely automated sort of process. I don't sit there and say, we don't like this person, so we'll knock another 10 marks off their thing. So it happens to everybody. It goes up as well as down. One of those transitions into adulthood where you have to deal with stuff that you don't necessarily like, but happens to you anyway. People think scaling is about hard versus easy subjects, like a degree of difficulty score when we'll be watching the Olympics, hopefully in 7 weeks or whatever it is. If you see the high diving or the gymnastics, there's always sort of a degree of difficulty that various dives, etc. have that weights that compared to other things. People think that's what scaling's about. It isn't actually, but it is still sports related. It's actually about competition. It's about who you're competing against to get your mark. And we do this a lot in sporting kind of things. So say someone comes first in their school 100-metre final, probably be pretty pleased with that when they came home and told you that. But is it a higher or a lower level of achievement than someone coming 6th in an Olympic 100-metre final? Now you could possibly argue that coming first is always better than coming 6th, but most of us will probably say, hang on, the level of competition in the Olympics is just a tad different to your average school athletic carnival. Look, you might have lots of fast runners down here, I don't know. But we do that sort of bit of adjustment. We say, well, even coming 6th in that is probably a higher level of achievement than coming first in a school carnival. And so that's what the scaling process does. It just looks at each subject and looks at what's the academic strength of the students doing each of those subjects. And if you're in a subject that is full of really strong academic students, that will tend to push that subject up to acknowledge the heightened level of competition in that subject. Some other subjects you'll find will stay the same because they have a broad range of average students, and sometimes you'll find that will go down a little bit. Okay, if it goes down, I'm really sorry, can't do anything about it. The only reason we do it is so that we can add this kind of stuff together from all these different kind of contexts and form the aggregate and then the ATAR. You probably, at the end of the year, people tend to see the impact on their own marks, and so they think that we're just picking on them as an individual. I'd like to reassure you that my job is to pick on everybody in the state equally. So if I'm the most hated person in WA after the results come out, I've probably done my job really well. Anyone who wants a job, it's available for you. So with the vocational studies kind of thing, people sometimes think, oh, if my kid does Cert 4, that gives them an ATAR of 70. It doesn't actually do that. You only get an ATAR if you do ATAR subjects. But what happens if you achieve complete a Cert 4, the universities treat you in the same way or assess you in the same way as someone who has achieved an ATAR of 70. So any of the courses that have 70 as a minimum ATAR are open to people who get a Cert 4. You still need to achieve WACE though, that's still important, and you still need to satisfy the university's English requirement, which a Cert 4 may or may not do. It may do it for Murdoch, but not for ECU or UWA or Curtin. So just check the requirements and then you can't go far wrong. Now, the application process. So TISC is actually a not-for-profit company that's owned by the 4 public universities. They're our shareholders. And so we handle most of their applications. We'll talk about early offers in a minute. We also have a couple or handful of associate members, and they handle their own applications, but they promote their courses through our website. If anyone's thinking of studying interstate, which was a big and growing trend a couple of years back, it's sort of ground to a bit of a halt in the last 18 months or so, but may pick up again as we all get vaccinated and everything. Just be aware there are similar bodies to TISC around the country, and they handle the applications for their state. Each state is completely sort of separate. I had someone ask me a couple of weeks ago, if the universities here find out that I put in an application to Melbourne University, will they get upset with me? Will that affect my chances of getting in? Short answer is no. Long answer is they won't have any idea whether you've applied to Melbourne because it's all completely separate. And even if they knew, it wouldn't affect it. They're not quite that thin-skinned. So people are going left, right and centre, so it doesn't really matter. Separate application process, separate list of courses you can choose from, separate preference list, and you'll get a separate offer from each state. Some dates to be aware of, just roughly. So applications did open at the beginning of term 2 because of the early offers. Normally don't open until into term 3. Universities are still, there are some changes still happening with their courses. They do a lot of their finalising of stuff during term 2. So in term 3 we'll release a printed TISC guide to all year 12 students that will help them through the rest of the process and have sort of the final list of, well, relatively final list of courses. They still have bright ideas and add new courses about a week before the offers are going to come out and everything. So it's a bit of a moving beast. This year there's no application fee, so it's absolutely free to apply through TISC. And I'll come back to this when I talk about early offers. So even if someone has an early offer, I think it's a good idea to apply through TISC to keep all of your options open all the way through. Okay, it's the easiest and the most efficient way to do that. If anyone is interested in something like medicine or dentistry or their pathways, including pharmacy, I think at UWA, they close at the end of September and you cannot add those courses to your application after that. So if you're thinking about those, you've got to get an application in by the end of September and have those on your list. You can always take them off later, you can always rearrange everything, but have them on there and then you'll be fine. Everything else stays open right through until February. So if you decide to apply in February, you can do that this year. I'd get in early, get it sorted by the end of September, I think, because then you get it done before those last couple of weeks of school with exams and end of year kind of stuff, because it's very easy to forget it completely if you don't do it by then. So I think most schools are still hammering the end of September thing a bit. Now at TISC, because we don't just like to put people under pressure throughout the year with doing ATAR courses, we like to give them a final kick at the end of the year as well. We'll release your results the week before Christmas. It'll be probably the Saturday of the weekend before Christmas. And I say to you 12, that gives you a couple of days to lock yourself in your bedroom and not come out and talk to anyone, cause your parents grief. And then normally we find that within about 2 days everyone's over it and they realise the world keeps turning, and so you can then come out of your room and actually enjoy Christmas with your family again. Just before Christmas we will do one big round of offers though, about 14,000 or so offers, and this is where all of those hard to get into courses, physio, vet science, medicine, dentistry, all that kind of thing will be included that aren't available through early offers. It could even be Christmas Eve. It will be either the 23rd or 24th when those are released. So just another little Christmas present. I hope that doesn't send anyone back into their bedroom for Christmas. The universities are very keen to do one of these before Christmas. What I want to say is that you'll actually have a couple of days with your final results in front of you to rearrange your preferences if you want to. So you're not going in totally blind, you can actually do it, and I'll show you in a sec how you can get the most bang for your buck from that. So we have a big offer around before Christmas, then we allow you to change your mind again if you want to, and you can try for something else in January. So you can actually keep your options open all the way through until pretty much till semester starts, which we'll talk about again when we come to the early offers. So on your TISC application, it's all done online. It's tedious but pretty straightforward. You've got up to 6 preferences you can put down. You don't have to use all 6 if you don't want to. That's completely up to the student. They're your business. You can do whatever you like with them. But here are some tips from my perspective of knowing how the system works. So I wouldn't just put 1 in unless you're prepared to either get it or not. Sometimes it is possible, I think, to fill up your entire 6 with all medicine preferences. So you'll either get the top one or you'll get none of them. And if you end up with an ATAR 40, you're unlikely to get a medicine offer, just putting it out there. So this is how I'd do it. So this is not, I should make the distinction, the universities with the early offers, they want you to have that course as your first preference if you're coming through TISC, so that's fine, do that, get the early offer and then rearrange stuff. I'm talking about the order that you should have things leading up to that big offer round just before Christmas, the sort of final bit of it. You can afford, Year 12s, you can afford to go for your dream course. Okay, one of the most frustrating things I come across when I'm talking to Year 12s is their ability to talk themselves out of going for stuff. Okay, you really should back yourself. Don't worry too much about whether you're going to get in or not. Okay, because as I'll show you, you're not going to be disadvantaged even if you don't get your dream course. Okay, it's more important that you go for it and back yourself and give yourself a shot at getting in. So spend a bit of time between now and the end of the year just thinking, everything else being equal, what's the course I'd most love to do at university, and put that down as your first preference or your first couple if you want to. It's in the middle of your list that I'd put your safe choices. Now, most of the courses at university have a guaranteed entry ATAR these days. So once you get your results, you can actually compare that to the list that you'll have, and you can say, okay, well, I've got 71. It means I can get into any course that has 70 as a minimum. So you can actually make really safe choices. If you've got an early offer and you want to put it in your TISC preference list, I'd put it around here somewhere. Okay, so then you've still got that sitting there. It's fine, you'll still have that. Even if you don't get offered it, it will still be sitting there on the university system. But it enables you to keep that as a backup if you want and go for other stuff, so you're not locked into anything. And the other thing I'd say to keep in mind is think about a bit of a plan B, particularly if you're aiming for something like physio or one of those hard to get into courses. If you don't get into that, what's another course you'd be happy to get into that you could use as a stepping stone to where you want to get? There's always a possibility. So if you follow that sort of general thing, you cover from best case scenario to worst case scenario, and you should be fine. We're going to try and give you the highest preference on your list if we possibly can at the end of the year. So when we do that big offer round just before Christmas, we're going to look at everybody's preference list and we say, can we give this person their first preference? And if we can, that'll be great. Happy Christmas, have a wonderful time. If we can't give you your first preference, sometimes people think, oh, if I don't get my first preference, I'll miss out completely, or I'll have to wait till the next round or something. No, this all happens in that big offer round. If we can't give you your first preference, we'll actually ignore it completely. And we'll try just as hard to give you your next preference down. And if we can't give you that one, we'll ignore that one too. And we'll actually keep going down your list until we find the highest one of your preferences that we can make you an offer in. And here's the trick that you really need to get your head around. Once we find that highest preference that we can make you an offer in, you don't get looked at for anything underneath that. So this is why the preference order is really important. No, I didn't. So say you've got a dream course in mind that you want to do, but you're thinking, oh, I'm not sure I'll get in, so I'm worried that you'll be disadvantaged if you don't get it. So I see lots of people put a safe choice as number one, and they put their dream course lower down, thinking that will work. But what happens is we start at the top, see a safe choice there, yep, this person can get an offer for that, so that's what they get. And the problem is they don't even get considered for their dream course because they've got it as a lower preference. Okay, so we've got a video about this up on the website. It'll probably make more sense towards the end of the year to go through it again, but you can actually make the whole thing work to your benefit if you understand how the preferences work. So make sure you do that. Now the early offers. They originally came about because of COVID, and I think the marketing people got hold of them, and it's now sort of on for young and old. So to Year 12, say if you want an early offer, get one. You know, they're giving them out, why wouldn't you get something that's being offered there? Just a couple of things I do want to say about them. If you don't feel like applying for one, or you apply for one and don't get one, don't let it worry you. It's not going to affect anything at the end of the year. You might have 5 early offers, it won't affect your selection through TISC at the end of the year. You might have none, it won't affect that. Okay, there'll still be plenty of places available at the end of the year. So they are totally optional. Don't let them become a distraction to you throughout Year 12. If you get one, tuck it away and then just keep working. If you do get an early offer, really important to check the fine print. Some of them have conditions. Some of those conditions are a bit fuzzily worded by the universities at times, so check whether it says you've got to achieve WACE or WASA or complete Year 12 or complete an ATAR. You might still need to satisfy the English requirements. You might still need to get a certain ATAR at the end of the year. So check all of that fine print carefully, because what you don't want to do is come at the end of the year and find them taking the offer back off you again. That would just be worse than not getting one to start off with. So check any conditions. If you do get an early offer, it's really important for Year 12, those of you who are here, and parents, please impress this upon your students, it's really important to keep working through the rest of the year. The temptation is, and look, we're all human, I've got an early offer, I've got that golden ticket, I'm in. Who cares about the rest of Year 12? Unfortunately, and perhaps the ATAR is to blame for it, I don't know, but we've got this sort of thing that Year 12 is all about getting that key into university. We forget that it's actually like your pre-season training for university as well. It's not just the grand final, it's the pre-season. So if you get the ticket early and you just put your feet up for the rest of the year, you're not actually doing that final work that you need to develop the skills to do well at university. So I would suspect that about this time, there are quite a few people who took that approach last year, and there were a few, not a huge enough, but enough to be a bit of a worry. They will be finding it fairly tough at university now because they haven't done the hard yards throughout Year 12. So there's a purpose for the sort of rigour of Year 12 is to make sure that you're really well prepared for uni. So make sure you make the best of that. And please never feel that you're locked in. Even if you've got an early offer, even if you've accepted that early offer, you're not really locked into university until you turn up. And last year people had 4 or 5 different early offers. The universities didn't know where they were actually going to go in the end until they rocked up on the first day of semester. And even then, you've got about 3 weeks before you actually are locked in both financially and academically there. So please don't feel that you're locked in too early. A TISC application is the easiest way to change your mind and notify the universities that you've changed your mind. Okay, so do that and then you'll be fine. Again, another thing that probably, or did take a bit of a hit beginning of this year was deferral, or taking a gap year. When I was talking to Year 12s last year, in the middle of the COVID sort of thing, because it's been very common for people to think, oh, I wouldn't mind taking a year off or stuff, but a lot of people used to use that to go travelling, backpacking through Europe or stuff like that. So I used to say, well, you can go backpacking through Geraldton or Albany if you like for the year. Lovely places, not a bad place to backpack. So the deferral rates were far less than they usually are this year. So, but it's not uncommon, and it can be a really good idea for people to take a bit of a gap in between finishing Year 12. It's a long haul, lots of years of schooling. Quite often it can help people who are undecided just to have a bit of a break, do something different, work part-time or something. What happens is at the end of the year, in the December and the January offer rounds, students just notify the university, say, look, I do want to come and study this course, but not just yet. I want to take a bit of a gap, hold the place for me. And the universities will do that for most courses. They generally don't do it for music courses and performing arts courses like that, because you've got to keep up your skills there. And medicine can be a bit funny about doing it as well. But pretty much every other course will let you defer. It could be 6 months, sometimes people do it for that. It could be 12 months, sometimes it can even be longer. Okay, and then you just take the place up with the university. So I don't have many words of wisdom, but this is what I've observed over the years as what sort of works for people to be successful in Year 12. It's really important to keep a balanced outlook. It can get stressful. A little bit of stress isn't a bad thing. Too much stress is a bad thing. So you want to sort of keep that balance if you can. It's really important that students work solidly, as I've said a couple of times, both as individuals but also as a group, helping one another, supporting one another throughout Year 12. The better a group of students in a subject do as a group, the better each individual does out of that. Sort of a really circular kind of thing. So work together and individually and you'll do fine. Got plenty of time to do some research. Never be worried if you're totally undecided as to what you want to do at university. Gee, I reckon half the university students are totally undecided what they want to do at university still. A lot of the university courses are designed to give you flexibility like that these days. And if they're not, there are lots of advisors at university. So if you find you know, a couple of weeks into semester and you feel absolutely miserable, think I've made the wrong choice, have a chat with someone. They might not be able to move you out of the course straight away, and they might say, look, just give it the rest of this semester, because sometimes week 3 or 4 at uni is when everyone feels a bit shattered, but they come good after about week 5 or 6, so that's very common. So they'll help you through, and if you're still miserable at the end of first semester, they'll help you move into another course. So things are a lot more sort of compassionate these days than they used to be. But any time the university comes to the school, or any open days or anything like that, websites, etc., make sure you do the research. If you've got your heart set on a hard to get into course, have a plan B in mind. The hardest conversations I've had, and I remember shortly after I started university, I was talking to a young lady who has had her heart set on medicine and didn't get in. And I was saying to her, well, what else did you think that you might want to do? She said, nothing else. It was medicine or anything. At that point she hung up, and I felt quite distressed for her, because as far as she was concerned, her whole world had collapsed. So think of plan A and plan B. There's always a way to get where you want to go. Okay, might not be obvious, you might need to get some advice, which brings me to my final point. Please never be afraid to seek advice, and particularly I'd say this to the Year 12s. We do a lot of talking to parents, and that's fine, but we are governed by privacy laws and everything like that. So if your student has refused to tell you what they got for Year 12, we can't tell you. We do occasionally still get parents who ring up the university wanting to know what their kids got in first semester. You'll be lucky to know anything that's going on at university. The university just won't tell you at all. If you've got someone who's really sort of upset about something and say a bit inhibited about calling, very happy for parents to make that initial introduction and explain the situation, everything like that. We'll always generally prefer to talk to the student to give the advice, because they're probably going to have to go in and change their preferences. It is their future that we're talking about. It's their sort of study plan. But I'd say to Year 12s, don't worry about calling us up and having a chat. You can use our website. Got lots of information on there, probably more than you'd ever want or need. We use a team of inquiry people, particularly over the busy period, and a lot of them are university students that have been with us for a few years. So it's only a couple of years since they were in your shoes. They know what it feels like. They know all the uncertainty and everything like that, but they know how the system works. I think the universities you'll find really helpful as well. They're very approachable these days, have nice people to talk to, etc. So you won't, get treated with disrespect or anything like that. They'll do their best to help. I suppose the benefit of talking to TISC, if you want to talk to TISC, is that we have no vested interest. We don't care which university you go to. So we're not going to try and sell you one university over another. We don't care what course you get into either. The only thing we want to do is to make sure that you understand how the system works, so that you can actually make it work to your advantage. So we're a bit sort of a neutral, safe ground. So students, send us an email if you want, call us up. Parents, you can act as a intro agency if you want. We will talk to you if the person doesn't want to talk to us at all, but we can't divulge any information that you don't already know.